So this shock is the rear shock off a 92 VW Golf or a Jetta, I can't remember. Megan Racing. It doesn't have the normal bolt mount that you would have on the top. It's got a post. So it's drilled through the top where the shock holes are, the shock mounts. So it's using the same bracket, it's just not using the same bolt. And that goes through up into the rear interior. So it bolts in here. So it's just a hole drilled through the top of the bracket. And these are fully adjustable compression and rebound. Not gas shocks. I would have liked to have had gas shocks, but again, this isn't a serious race car, so I'm not too concerned about it. So one of the things that is important to note is that our coil spring mounts in here. This is a coilover that's supposed to go onto that shock, but we don't mount them up there. We put them in here. I would have liked to have kept it on the shock, but there just isn't enough room. If you look at the wheel well, there's no clearance. Now, I don't like that the shock is not perfectly square to the axle. It doesn't go straight up and down, it's actually canted in a little bit. To get it right, I would have had to cut this mount off and weld it straight, and then that would have let me push the shock over. I've had a couple thousand miles on this setup. I've even raced it, played with it at Watkins Glen. No problems, no fade in them, so they're not leaking. I'm not too concerned about it, but a purist, if you really want, I would cut that bracket off and move the shock over to be square. The stock setup gets away with it because it's got pivots on them, so they can move around a little bit even if they're not squared. I've got a rubber mount inside this inner sleeve for the spring. It sits in here. So what the mount does is it's a bump stop that'll hit up against the top. The bumper is just a boat, piece of hard rubber from a boat trailer where the front of the boat bumps against it. I had a couple of them laying around for another project, and that's where I grabbed it from. Now the bracket itself, so this has an aluminum plate at the bottom that's tapered. I can't remember what the angle is, but Rich Bryant and I made this up, and what it does is it cants the assembly at an angle that makes it kind of straight. So as you can see, this isn't straight up and down with the axle, it's actually canted in, pointing at this top shock mount, spring mount. And then it's got an adjustable collar on it that you can go up and down if you want to change the height. I've got it set up as high as I can go, so when I put the spring in, the spring is hitting on the bottom and on the top. And you don't want the rear axle to fall down any lower, or else your spring is going to come unhinged from the top and start bouncing around. See, as this axle comes down, the angle of the spring changes. So it's no longer facing at the stop. It's coming back down. So that's why this mount has to be canted forward, so that when the axle is dropped, you still can be pretty close to matching it. But if you let that spring come detached, it's going to be off center, and when the axle goes up, it's not going to hit its spot. So the way you get away with that is you have these limit straps. This is an 11-inch. My other car I've got 10-inch on, but you bolt these in I usually mount to one of the shock bolts on the bottom and somewhere on the frame, so that when your axle comes down, the strap limits how far down it can go, and that way your spring will always have contact. You'll also notice that on our cars we have this mount. It's coming into here, and not a big fan. It's pretty heavy. I actually boxed this one with steel to make it stronger. Not that I had to, but it's just one of those things I wanted to make sure it was. But of course that adds a lot of weight. And when this is up in there, the Panhard bar goes across. So what I came up with is rod ends, and they work really good. Just put that bar in place of it, and so instead of this heavy monster, you're about 2/3 the weight, maybe a little less, and these work really well. I don't have the final dimension on it. This was another 4-link project that I was trying to do with these cars, to build a 4-link suspension for it, but didn't work out. Just isn't enough room between the gas tank and the tire, spare tire box. A lot of failed attempts at doing things just to play and see if I could do them. Just to give you an idea of what else can be done with the rear suspensions, this is from my Daytona, and this project's still a long ways from being finished, but I wanted to give these ideas to you. You can see that it uses the same support rod that I did for the Laser, and that gives you the extra clearance for the exhaust. You can see how that's really opened up, and the shock setup is different in that this is a bolt-in type shock, and if you're looking for a shock that's a direct replacement, but you have the money to spend, for $240 you can get the QA1, and this one is pretty much the same as a stock shock from the G-bodies. The only difference is where the bolts go through at the top, you've got to press that bushing out and replace it with the bushing that came out of your original shock. But otherwise it's pretty much the same thing. I think this came from a Buick application. I'm not sure what year. It does have compression and rebound adjustment, but it does not have gas. If that's a big deal, then go to Bilstein or one of those other ones. But I haven't driven this yet. I've actually had these for over 5 years, and I got them on sale for about $170 back in the day when QA1 wasn't a big name like they are now. But if you're looking for something direct fit, that's the closest that I know of without going to the old style shocks that we've been with. My rear spring setup uses the spring that Rich Bryant is selling, and this has the barrel shape where the ends are smaller than the middle. When the rear end goes up and down in an arc motion like ours do, the barrel gives you more room inside. So if you've got the adjuster set up inside, it works better. I also wanted to give myself more travel. So to do that, I had to eliminate that bump stop that was at the top, and I shrank everything down as much as I could. So if you look here, you can see that I've changed the internal bumper that stays flush with the top of this threaded portion, and I've shrunk the bottom of the threaded portion down so that it's just a half-inch thick mount for the bolt to go through. And at the top, I cut off the bump from the frame. I put in a polyurethane retainer for the top of the spring. I cut off the top bump stop, and I welded a nut in place, and that would allow me to just bolt that rubber polyurethane pad at the top, which really shrank it down. The bottom, as you can see, the threaded portion is still there, but the big aluminum hunk at the bottom is now gone, and it's just got a small angled adapter, that steel adapter that welded in. Overall, it's about 2 5/8 inches on the inside. Overall, The full length of it's only about 3 inches for the adjuster. So it's about an inch less than the other one on the Laser was. This is a picture from the top down, and you can see that there are 2 holes in the bottom. The center one being the bolt hole, and the other one just being for a pin to make sure that it doesn't get spun. Here are the components that make that up. I'll post Rich Bryant's website in the description. As far as I know, he's still selling parts. I don't know what spring rates are best for our cars, to be honest. I got mine set up for racing. They're pretty hefty. But he sells all different weights of springs. And this shows the bottom of the axle, actually where the coil spring mounts in a stock setup. It just shows where this. I had to drill an extra hole for the center bolt to go through.